My name is Dulcie Whitford. I'm 28 years old. For 20 years, my parents called me the slow one, while my sister Miranda collected Harvard degrees and inheritance promises. They mocked my dyslexia at dinner tables, excluded me from family decisions, and paid me a fraction of what they paid her. But on Miranda's graduation day at the Plaza Hotel, in front of 350 guests, a stranger handed me an envelope that would expose every lie my parents ever told about me. What they didn't know? Grandma had been watching. She saw everything. And she left me something that would flip the entire Whitford empire upside down. The Whitfords were old money Manhattan, the kind of family whose name appeared on hospital wings and museum plaques. My father, Gerald Whitford, ran Whitford Properties, a commercial real estate empire my grandmother Eleanor had built from a single Brooklyn office in 1965. By 2024, the company was valued at $92 million. I was born with dyslexia, diagnosed at 7. The letters on pages would swim and rearrange themselves, turning simple sentences into puzzles that took me 3 times longer to solve than other kids. My parents' response wasn't support. It was shame. When I was 12, they hired tutors for Miranda. Violin lessons at Juilliard, French immersion classes, SAT prep with a Princeton graduate who charged $400 an hour. When I asked about getting help for my reading, my mother Priscilla just sighed. Dulcie, we've already spent so much on specialists. At some point, we have to accept that some children just aren't academic. I was 12, I believed her. So I learned to adapt on my own. Audiobooks became my lifeline. I developed a system of visual notes, diagrams, and flowcharts that helped me process information in ways traditional reading couldn't. And every Sunday afternoon, I'd take the train to my grandmother Eleanor's apartment on the Upper West Side, where she'd sit with me for hours, explaining concepts through stories instead of textbooks. Dulcie, she told me once, her weathered hand covering mine, you read slower than most, but you see things others miss. That's not a disability, sweetheart. That's a different kind of vision. I didn't fully understand what she meant then. I would, eventually. But first, I had to survive another 19 years of being the Whitford family's embarrassing secret. Christmas 2018. 20 relatives gathered around the mahogany table in my parents' Upper East Side townhouse. Crystal chandeliers, catered dinner, the annual performance of Whitford family perfection. My father stood at the head of the table, wine glass raised. I'd like to make an announcement, he said, his voice carrying that boardroom authority he wore like a second skin. Miranda has been accepted to Harvard Law School, full scholarship. Applause, cheers. Miranda blushed with practiced modesty. My eldest daughter, Gerald continued, beaming, will be the first Whitford to attend Harvard in 3 generations. She's going to take this family and this company to extraordinary heights. More applause. Uncle Richard clapped Miranda on the shoulder. Aunt Catherine dabbed her eyes with a napkin. Then my father's gaze drifted down the table. To me. And Dulcie. He paused. The warmth in his voice evaporated. Well, Dulcie is also here. A few relatives chuckled. Soft, uncomfortable laughs. The kind people make when they don't know what else to do. Miranda didn't defend me. She laughed along with them. I stared at my plate. The roasted lamb blurred through the tears I refused to let fall. Under the table, a hand found mine. Thin fingers, papery skin. Grandma Eleanor, seated across from me, squeezed gently. When I looked up, her eyes held something fierce, something that looked almost like fury directed at her own son. She didn't say anything, not then. But 3 months later, she called me to her apartment, said she needed to show me something important. I didn't know it at the time, but that Christmas dinner, that moment of casual cruelty in front of 20 witnesses, had set something in motion, something that would take 5 years to detonate. After graduating from a state university in 2022, not an Ivy, never an Ivy, I applied for a position at Whitford Properties. I wanted to prove I could contribute, that the family business could be my path too. my father agreed to hire me as an administrative assistant, salary $42,000 a year. That same month, Miranda joined as chief legal counsel. Her salary, $280,000 plus bonuses. My job consisted of photocopying documents, booking conference rooms, and fetching coffee for executives who never learned my name. I wasn't invited to a single meeting, never shown a single contract, but I watched and I listened. I discovered something about myself during those long hours in the copy room. I could spot patterns others missed. When executives discussed deals in the hallway, I'd sketch diagrams of the relationships between parties, the flow of money, the potential conflicts. A skill I'd developed to compensate for my reading difficulties had become something else entirely. Grandma Eleanor had taught me this. During those Sunday afternoons at her apartment, she'd spread out old contracts from the company's early days and show me how to read them not word by word, but as systems, as structures. Your father reads contracts like a lawyer, she told me once in 2019, just before her health started declining. He looks for what he can exploit. You read them like an architect. You see how all the pieces connect. That same day, she'd handed me a small wooden box, mahogany, with brass hinges. Keep this safe, she'd said. Don't open it yet. When you need it, you'll know. I'd taken the box home, tucked it in my closet, and tried to forget the strange weight of her words. March 2019, Grandma Eleanor's apartment. Grandma. She was 82 then, her once vigorous frame grown thin, her silver hair wispy against the pillow of her armchair. But her eyes, those sharp, knowing eyes, hadn't dimmed at all. Sit down, Dulcie. I sat across from her in the living room where I'd spent so many Sunday afternoons. The walls were covered with photographs. Eleanor breaking ground on her first Brooklyn property in 1965. Eleanor shaking hands with Mayor Koch. Eleanor accepting a Women in Business Award in 1987. Not a single photo of my father at the helm. I built Whitford Properties from nothing, she said, her voice carrying decades of steel. One office, one secretary, 60 years of work. Your father. She paused, and something bitter flickered across her face. Your father inherited it. He didn't build it. He doesn't understand what it means to create something. Grandma, he judges people by their credentials, their degrees, their ability to perform in boardrooms. She leaned forward. I judge people by how they treat those who can't fight back. And you, Dulcie, you're the only one in this family who knows how to be kind. She pressed the wooden box into my hands. There's something inside that might help you someday, but not yet. You're not ready yet, and neither is Gerald. Her grip tightened. When the time comes, when he shows you exactly who he is, you'll know what to do. I wanted to ask what she meant, what was inside, why she'd chosen me, but she changed the subject, started talking about the weather, her garden, the book she was reading. 18 months later, she was gone. Pancreatic cancer. I held her hand in the hospice, the only family member at her bedside. The box remained unopened in my closet. April 2024. The email arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Subject line: Position restructuring, confidential. Dear Ms. Whitford, as part of our ongoing organizational optimization, your current position will be eliminated, effective July 1st, 2024. HR will contact you regarding severance options. I read it 3 times. The letters swam, rearranged, settled back into the same devastating message. They were firing me. That evening, I stayed late, organizing files no one would ever look at. Through the thin wall separating my cubicle from my father's corner office, I heard voices. Gerald and Priscilla. Can't have her here when Miranda takes over, my father was saying. It looks bad. The CEO's sister working as a secretary. People will ask questions. What kind of questions? Why she's not in leadership. Why we haven't promoted her. A pause. Why she's the way she is. My mother's response came soft, almost gentle. We've done everything we could for her, Gerald. Some children just don't have what it takes. Exactly. So she needs to go. We'll give her a generous severance. She can find something else, something more suited to her abilities. I pressed my palm against the wall. $42,000 a year. My studio apartment in Queens, shared with 2 roommates, cost $1,800 a month. No savings, no safety net. If I lost this job, I'd be homeless within 2 months. But the money wasn't what made my chest tight. It was the realization settling into my bones like frost. If I let them do this, if I accepted their version of who I was, I would spend the rest of my life as the family failure. Not because I'd actually failed, but because I'd never been given the chance to succeed. Miranda's graduation party was tomorrow. I wondered what other announcements my father had planned. May 15th, 2024, the Plaza Hotel, Grand Ballroom. 350 guests filled the gilded room. Business partners, investors, lawyers from white shoe firms, extended family members I barely recognized. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across silk tablecloths. A 12-piece orchestra played Gershwin in the corner. This was Gerald Whitford's kingdom, his stage, the place where he performed his role as patriarch, as mogul, as the man who had everything. I stood in the entrance, tugging at the hem of my dress. Black. Simple. $79 from Zara, the most I could afford on my salary. Everyone else glittered in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. My mother intercepted me before I could find a seat. Dulcie? Priscilla's gaze traveled from my drugstore makeup to my scuffed heels, her lips pressed into a thin line. You couldn't find anything nicer? This is what I have. Well, she adjusted her Cartier bracelet. You'll be at table 27, near the service entrance. Try not to draw attention to yourself. Of course. And Dulcie? She leaned closer, her Chanel No. 5 overwhelming. Tonight is Miranda's night. Whatever you're feeling, whatever resentment you think you're entitled to, keep it to yourself. Don't embarrass us. She walked away before I could respond. Table 27 was at the back of the ballroom, partially hidden behind a pillar. My table mates were distant cousins I'd met maybe twice. From my seat, I could see the main stage, the massive portrait of Miranda in her Harvard regalia, the banner reading, "Congratulations, Miranda Whitford, Harvard Law Class of 2024, and near the entrance, standing alone by the door, a silver-haired man in a gray suit. He wasn't mingling, wasn't eating, just watching. His eyes found mine across the crowded room. Something cold prickled down my spine. At 8:30 p.m., the orchestra stopped. The lights dimmed. A spotlight illuminated the stage where my father stood, champagne flute raised. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight to celebrate an extraordinary young woman. The applause began before he finished the sentence. Miranda graduated top 5% of her Harvard Law class. She completed a clerkship with Justice Reynolds, and last month, she made partner track at Sullivan & Cromwell in record time. Gerald's voice swelled with pride. But tonight, I'm not just celebrating her achievements, I'm announcing her future. Miranda joined him on stage, radiant in emerald Valentino. Effective immediately, Miranda Whitford will inherit my entire estate upon my passing. This includes our family residence at 740 Park Avenue, currently valued at $13 million, a Tesla Model S Plaid, and most importantly, he paused for effect, the position of CEO of Whitford Properties when I retire. The room erupted, standing ovation, camera flashes. Miranda dabbed at her eyes with performative grace, 350 people celebrating, and not one of them glanced at table 27. The cousin beside me, a woman I'd met at a funeral 8 years ago, leaned over. Dulcie, right? So what does that mean for you? I opened my mouth, closed it. What could I say? That I'd just been formally erased from my own family? That the termination letter in my inbox was only the beginning? That every fear I'd ever had about being worthless had just been confirmed in front of everyone who mattered? The applause died down, Miranda hugged our father. Cameras clicked, and through the crowd, the silver-haired man at the door began walking toward me, slowly, deliberately, like he'd been waiting for this exact moment. The man stopped at my table. Up close, I could see he was older than I'd thought, early 60s, with deep-set eyes and the careful posture of someone who spent his life in courtrooms. "Miss Whitford?" "That's me." I straightened in my chair. "Can I help you?" "My name is Jonathan Ellis." He pulled a business card from his breast pocket, cream-colored, embossed. "Morrison and Blake, attorneys at law." "I was your grandmother's lawyer." "My grandmother." The words hit like a punch. "Eleanor passed away 3 years ago." "I'm aware." He didn't sit, didn't soften. "She left something for you, with very specific instructions about when to deliver it." From inside his jacket, he produced a cream envelope, heavy stock, sealed with red wax bearing a notary's stamp. "What is this?" "Her will, the real one." His voice dropped. "The one your father doesn't know exists." I stared at the envelope. The notary seal read Morrison and Blake, September 12, 2019. 5 months after that Sunday afternoon in her apartment. 5 months after she'd handed me the wooden box. "I don't understand." "Your grandmother gave me explicit instructions. I was to deliver this document on the day your father publicly disinherited you." Ellis glanced toward the stage, where Gerald and Miranda were still basking in applause. "I believe that just occurred." My hands trembled as I took the envelope. "Mr. Ellis, what's in here?" For the first time, something almost like warmth flickered in his eyes. "Mrs. Eleanor told me to tell you, give this to Dulcie on the day Gerald shows her exactly who he is. By then, she'll be ready." He straightened his tie. "I'll be available when you have questions. You have my card." Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. I couldn't breathe in that ballroom. I pushed through the service entrance, found an empty hallway near the kitchen. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the sounds of celebration muffled to a distant hum. My fingers shook as I broke the wax seal. Inside, 3 pages of dense legal text. A notarized signature. A date. September 12, 2019. I read slowly, carefully. The letters swam, but I forced them into focus. "I, Eleanor Margaret Whitford, being of sound mind and body, do hereby revoke all previous testamentary documents and declare this to be my last will and testament." My eyes caught on a paragraph near the middle. "To my granddaughter, Dulcie Ann Whitford, I bequeath 51% of my shares in Whitford Properties, LLC, currently valued at approximately $47 million, along with all voting rights associated therewith." I read it again, and again. 51%, controlling interest. The will continued. "This bequest is made with full knowledge of my son Gerald's treatment of Dulcie. She has been excluded, diminished, and denied opportunity, not due to lack of ability, but due to lack of support. Dulcie is not slow. Dulcie was abandoned, and I will not allow her father's prejudice to continue after my death." A sob caught in my throat. Grandma had seen. She'd seen everything. Condition. To activate this bequest, Dulcie must formally request an emergency board meeting within 72 hours of receiving this document. Failure to act within this window will render this will null and void, and all assets shall transfer per my 2015 testament. 72 hours. The deadline would fall at 8:30 p.m. on May 18th. I leaned against the cold wall, the document clutched to my chest. My grandmother had given me a weapon. Now I had to decide if I was brave enough to use it. Jonathan Ellis was waiting by the coat check when I emerged. "You read it." "The 72-hour clause," my voice cracked. "Why would she put that in?" "Your grandmother knew you, Miss Whitford." He handed me a second card, this one with a personal cell number handwritten on the back. "She knew that if she gave you unlimited time, you might convince yourself not to act. The deadline isn't a punishment, it's permission. Permission? To stop waiting for your family to change their minds about you, to take what's rightfully yours. He checked his watch. The deadline is 8:30 p.m., May 18th. 3 days. If you want to proceed, you'll need to submit a formal request for an emergency board meeting. I can help you draft it. Through the ballroom doors, I could see my father still on stage, posing for photographs with Miranda. My mother circulated among guests, accepting congratulations as if she'd earned them herself. If I did this, if I invoked the will, I would destroy every relationship I had left. My parents would never forgive me. Miranda would see it as betrayal. But if I stayed silent, I would accept their verdict. I would become exactly what they'd always said I was, the failure, the slow one, the daughter who didn't matter. Miss Whitford, Ellis's voice cut through my spiral. Your grandmother believed in you. She spent the last 3 years of her life preparing for this moment. The question is, do you believe in yourself? I looked at the will in my hands, at the elegant signature of the woman who'd held my hand under Christmas tables and taught me to read contracts like architecture. I'll call you tomorrow, I said. We're requesting that board meeting. Ellis allowed himself a small smile. She said you would. I'm going to pause here for just a moment. If you've ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to believe in you, if you know what it feels like to be dismissed, I want you to comment the word enough below. Let me know I'm not alone in this. And if you want to see what happened when I walked into that boardroom, keep watching, because we're just getting started. Now back to the story. That night, back in my cramped Queens apartment, I finally opened the wooden box. My roommates were asleep. The only light came from the street lamp outside my window, casting orange stripes across my bed where I sat cross-legged, the mahogany box in my lap. The brass hinges creaked as I lifted the lid. Inside, a handwritten letter on Eleanor's personal stationery, a faded document with a 1965 date stamp, and a USB drive, sleek and modern, clearly added much later. I reached for the letter first. My dearest Dulcie, if you're reading this, then Jonathan has done his job, and your father has done exactly what I feared he would. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you while I was alive, but I can protect you now. The enclosed document is the original partnership agreement from 1965, when I founded Whitford Properties with 2 colleagues who have long since passed. Your father has never seen it. It establishes that the founders' shares carry permanent voting rights that cannot be diluted or transferred without board approval. The USB contains something else. Something your father hoped I'd forgotten. In 2018, Gerald proposed a resolution to reduce my voting rights from 51% to 10%. His stated reason? I was too old to understand modern business. The real reason? He wanted control, and I was in his way. The board rejected his proposal by 2 votes. I was one of those votes. I never forgot what he tried to do. And I never forgave him for the way he treated you to justify it, as though diminishing you somehow proved I was unfit. Use this wisely, Dulcie. Not for revenge, for justice. All my love, Grandma Eleanor. I plugged the USB into my laptop. The file was labeled Board Meeting Minutes March 2018, PDF. My father's attempt to strip his own mother of power. Documented, time-stamped, evidence, May 16th, 9:00 a.m. Margaret Coleman answered on the second ring. Dulcie Whitford. Her voice carried the rasp of someone who'd smoked for decades and laughed even longer. I've been wondering when you'd call. You know who I am? Sweetheart, your grandmother and I built half of Brooklyn together in the 70s. She talked about you constantly. A pause. She also told me about the will. 3 years ago, right before she passed. I gripped my phone tighter. Then you know what I'm about to do. I know what you're considering doing. There's a difference. Margaret's tone shifted, sharper now, more businesslike. You want to request an emergency board meeting. That requires 3 board members to sign the petition. I'm one. You'll need 2 more. Can you help me find them? I can do better than that. I heard papers shuffling in the background. Gerald Whitford isn't as popular as he thinks. His management style is, let's call it autocratic. At least 4 board members have expressed concerns privately. They just need someone to go first. Hope sparked in my chest. Who? Richard Holloway. Susan Park. She corrected herself. Susan Parker. They've both been on the receiving end of Gerald's temper in closed sessions. I'll make some calls. Another pause. Dulcie, I need you to understand something. This isn't going to be pleasant. Your father will fight. Your sister will fight. They'll say terrible things. They've been saying terrible things my whole life. At least now I get to respond. Margaret laughed, a warm, genuine sound. Eleanor always said you had steel under all that quiet. I'm starting to see what she meant. She cleared her throat. I'll have the petition ready by tonight. Board meeting request, May 18th, 10:00 a.m., Whitford Tower, 42nd floor. Thank you, Margaret. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you're sitting in that boardroom. May 17th. Gerald found out about the board meeting at 4:00 p.m. I know this because Miranda called me 45 minutes later, her voice tight with controlled fury. What did you do? I was sitting in my cubicle at Whitford Properties, pretending to organize files. I don't know what you're talking about. Dad just got a notice from the board secretary. Emergency meeting tomorrow, requested by Margaret Coleman and 2 other directors. A pause, sharp as broken glass. Margaret Coleman hasn't requested anything in 15 years. What did you do? Maybe she has concerns about company management. Don't play games with me, Dulcie. Miranda's composure cracked. If you're trying to embarrass us, trying to make some kind of scene, I'm just doing my job, Miranda. Same as always. She hung up without saying goodbye. 20 minutes later, Gerald stormed past my cubicle on his way to his office. He didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge I existed, just slammed his door hard enough to rattle the windows. Through the wall, I heard him on the phone. Ridiculous waste of time. Margaret's probably going senile. We'll address her concerns and move on. No, I'm not worried. Dulcie? My God, Miranda, she can barely read a spreadsheet. She's not a threat to anyone. I smiled. For the first time in 28 years, being underestimated felt like an advantage. That night, in my apartment, I prepared, printed 3 copies of the will, downloaded the 2018 board minutes onto my phone as backup, wrote a brief statement, not an accusation, just a presentation of facts. Jonathan Ellis confirmed he'd attend as the authenticating attorney. Margaret texted at 11 p.m. Petition filed. See you tomorrow. Your grandmother would be proud. I barely slept. But for once, it wasn't anxiety keeping me awake. It was anticipation. May 18th, 2024, 9:45 a.m., Whitford Tower. The elevator opened onto the 42nd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows, Italian marble, the kind of corporate opulence designed to intimidate. I stepped out in a borrowed gray blazer, my roommates 2 sizes too big, carrying a leather portfolio I'd bought at Goodwill for $12. The security guard at the boardroom door held up his hand. Name? Dulcie Whitford. He checked his tablet. Frowned. You're not on the authorized attendee list. I'm a Whitford Properties employee, and I have business with the board. Ma'am, this is a restricted meeting. I can't let you... Is there a problem? Miranda's voice behind me. I turned. She looked immaculate. Navy power suit, Hermes scarf, the uniform of someone who belonged in boardrooms. Dulcie. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. What are you doing here? I have information to present to the board. Information? Miranda laughed, a sharp performative sound. About what? You work in the copy room. The nature of my presentation is confidential. You don't even know what ROI stands for. Return on investment. It's not that complicated. Miranda's smile flickered. Before she could respond, our father appeared at the end of the hallway, flanked by 2 senior executives. What's going on here? Dulcie wants to attend the board meeting, Miranda said. I was just explaining that's not possible. Gerald looked at me the way he always did, like I was a stain he couldn't quite scrub out. Dulcie, go back to your desk. This doesn't concern you. Actually, a voice called from inside the boardroom, it does. Margaret Coleman appeared in the doorway. 72 years old, silver-haired, standing with the quiet authority of someone who'd been building empires when Gerald was still in diapers. I invited her. She has standing to address the board. Margaret smiled. Let her in. Gerald's jaw tightened. For a moment I thought he might physically block the door. But Margaret Coleman had been a board member for 32 years. Her authority in that room exceeded his. Fine. My father's voice was ice. Let her speak. We'll see how long it takes before she embarrasses herself. The boardroom was smaller than I'd imagined. An oval table of polished walnut, 12 leather chairs, portraits of past executives on the walls, including, I noticed, my grandmother Eleanor, her painted eyes seeming to watch from above the fireplace. 12 board members took their seats. Gerald at the head, Miranda to his right, not officially a board member yet, but positioned as heir apparent. I was directed to a chair at the far end, the children's table of corporate governance. In the corner, Jonathan Ellis sat with his briefcase. He caught my eye, nodded once. Robert Hartley, the board chairman, a distinguished man in his mid-60s who'd known my grandmother for decades, called the meeting to order. This emergency session was requested by Margaret Coleman, Richard Holloway, and Susan Parker. Margaret, you have the floor. Margaret rose. Thank you, Robert. I'll keep my remarks brief. She gestured toward me. The matter I wish to address concerns a document that has recently come to light, a document that affects the ownership structure of this company. I yield my time to Miss Dulcie Whitford. All eyes turned to me. Miranda smirked. Gerald leaned back in his chair with theatrical boredom. I stood. My hands were steadier than I expected. Thank you, Mrs. Coleman, and thank you to the board for allowing me to speak. I opened my portfolio. What I'm about to present may come as a surprise to some of you. I ask only that you listen to the evidence before reaching any conclusions. Gerald sighed audibly. I ignored him. Before I could continue, my father raised his hand. I'm sorry, Robert, but before we waste the board's valuable time... Gerald stood, buttoning his jacket with deliberate slowness. I need to provide some context. Gerald, Margaret started, Dulcie is my daughter. His voice carried that patronizing warmth he used for difficult clients. And I love her, but she's not qualified to address this board on any business matter. She works in an administrative role. She has no legal training, no financial background, no strategic experience. Miranda chimed in, her tone dripping with false sympathy. Dulcie also has dyslexia. She struggles with reading. We've tried to support her, but... She shrugged elegantly. Some limitations can't be overcome with effort alone. A few board members shifted uncomfortably. What we're seeing here, Gerald continued, is a troubled young woman acting out. Perhaps due to the announcement at Miranda's graduation party, sibling jealousy is... Mr. Whitford. Robert Hartley's voice cut through like a gavel. You'll have an opportunity to respond, but Miss Whitford requested this time, and she's entitled to use it. Gerald sat down. His expression promised consequences. Miranda caught my eye and mouthed, You're embarrassing yourself. I looked at them both, my father, my sister, and felt something shift inside me. Not anger, something colder, clearer. They weren't trying to protect me. They weren't even trying to protect the company. They were trying to protect their version of the story, the version where I was nothing. Thank you, Mr. Hartley. I pulled the document from my portfolio. I won't be discussing my reading ability today. I'll be discussing this. I held up the will. The room went silent. This is the last will and testament of Eleanor Margaret Whitford, founder of this company, notarized September 12th, 2019. Gerald's face drained of color. That's impossible. Gerald's voice came out strangled. My mother's will was executed in 2015. I have a copy. You have a copy of her previous will. I kept my voice level. Clinical. Under New York Estates, Powers, and Trusts law, a subsequent valid will automatically revokes all prior testamentary documents. This will, I placed it on the table, was executed 4 years after the one you possess. I slid the document to Robert Hartley. Mr. Ellis? I gestured to Jonathan, who rose from his corner seat. Would you please confirm the authenticity of this document? Jonathan approached the table. I'm Jonathan Ellis, partner at Morrison & Blake. I served as Eleanor Whitford's personal attorney from 2008 until her death in 2021. I can confirm this will was executed in my presence on September 12, 2019. It was witnessed by 2 independent notaries, and the original is held in escrow at Chase Private Client. Robert Hartley studied the document. His eyebrows rose. This will bequeaths 51% of Whitford Properties shares to... He looked up at me. To you, Miss Whitford. Murmurs rippled around the table. That's a forgery, Miranda said, but her voice had lost its confidence. It's not. Jonathan's response was immediate. And I'd advise you against making accusations of fraud without evidence, Ms. Whitford. Morrison & Blake's reputation speaks for itself. Gerald slammed his palm on the table. This is absurd. My mother was ill. She was being manipulated. Manipulated? I pulled out my phone. Perhaps you'd like to explain this then. I pressed play on the 2018 board meeting audio. My father's voice filled the room. Eleanor is 81 years old. She doesn't understand modern business. I moved to reduce her voting rights to 10%. The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute. That recording? Gerald's face had turned a mottled purple. That was a private board discussion, which Eleanor attended. I kept my voice steady. She recorded it, as was her right as a shareholder. Robert Hartley set down the will. His expression had shifted from neutral to something harder. Miss Whitford, would you read the relevant passage aloud? For the record. I nodded, took a breath. To my granddaughter, Dulcie Ann Whitford, I bequeath 51% of my shares in Whitford Properties, LLC, along with all voting rights associated therewith. I paused, letting the words settle. This bequest is made with full knowledge of my son Gerald's treatment of Dulcie. She has been excluded, diminished, and denied opportunity, not due to lack of ability, but due to lack of support. Miranda made a choking sound. Dulcie is not slow. Dulcie was abandoned, and I will not allow her father's prejudice to continue after my death. I looked directly at my father. Gerald has confused credentials with character, degrees with worth. He tried to strip me of my voting rights because I saw through him. He marginalized Dulcie because she reminded him of the kind of person he refuses to be. Gerald said nothing. His hands, I noticed, were trembling. The will concludes, I built this company from nothing. I choose who carries it forward. I choose Dulcie. Robert Hartley removed his reading glasses. Jonathan, you can confirm this document is legally binding? I can. The 2015 will is superseded. As of this moment, Dulcie Whitford is the majority shareholder of Whitford Properties. Margaret Coleman smiled quietly. Richard Holloway and Susan Parker exchanged glances, and for the first time in my life, I watched my father look at me with something other than dismissal. It was fear. This doesn't prove anything, Miranda said, but her voice had turned brittle. Even if the will is valid, which we'll contest, Dulcie has no business experience. She can't run a company. I'm not asking to run the company. I address the full board now. I'm asking you to examine the facts. I pulled the 2018 board minutes from my portfolio. March 14, 2018. Gerald Whitford proposed Resolution 2018-07 to reduce Eleanor Whitford's voting shares from 51% to 10%. His stated rationale, I found the passage. The founder is no longer capable of understanding modern business operations. That was taken out of context, Gerald said. The resolution failed by 2 votes, Eleanor's vote and Margaret Coleman's. I looked at Margaret. Is that accurate? Margaret nodded slowly. It is. Eleanor called me that night. She was devastated. Not because of the resolution, she knew it would fail, but because her own son had tried to take everything she'd built. This is ancient history, Gerald started. It's evidence. I cut him off. Evidence that my grandmother wasn't suffering from diminished capacity when she wrote that 2019 will. She was protecting herself from her own son, and she was protecting me. Robert Hartley looked around the table. Does anyone else have documentation contradicting what's been presented? Silence. Gerald? My father's jaw worked. No words came. Miranda? My sister stared at the table. Her perfect composure had cracked entirely. Richard Holloway spoke for the first time. Robert, I think we need to recess and have legal counsel review these documents. Agreed. Hartley checked his watch. We'll reconvene in 15 minutes. Jonathan, please remain available. The board members rose. Conversations broke out in hushed tones. Gerald didn't move. He sat frozen, staring at his mother's portrait on the wall. I wondered if he could feel her watching. 15 minutes stretched into 45. The board's legal counsel, a thin man named Patterson, whom I'd never met, spent the entire time on his phone with Morrison and Blake, Chase Private Client, and the New York State Court's Records Office. I sat alone at the end of the table. Jonathan Ellis brought me a glass of water. Margaret Coleman patted my shoulder as she passed. Gerald and Miranda huddled in the corner, their whispered argument growing increasingly heated. Finally, Patterson returned to the table and whispered in Robert Hartley's ear. Hartley's expression flickered, surprise, then resignation. Please take your seats. The board members filed back to their chairs. The tension in the room had crystallized into something brittle. Our legal counsel has confirmed the following, Hartley read from his notes. The will presented by Miss Whitford is valid under New York state law. It supersedes all previous testamentary documents. Effective immediately, Dulcie Ann Whitford holds 51% of Whitford Properties shares. Someone inhaled sharply. Additionally, Hartley continued, as majority shareholder, Miss Whitford has the right to propose motions to the board, including matters pertaining to executive leadership. He looked at me. Miss Whitford, do you have any motions you wish to bring forward? I stood. My heart was pounding, but my voice held steady. I have one motion. Gerald rose from his seat. Robert, this is... Sit down, Gerald. Hartley's voice carried unexpected steel. Miss Whitford has the floor. Gerald sat. His face had gone gray. I looked around the table at 12 people who, until an hour ago, had never considered me capable of anything. Now they waited for my decision. The power to destroy my father's career was in my hands. I thought about what my grandmother would want, and I made my choice. I'm not proposing to remove Gerald Whitford as CEO. The tension in the room shifted. Miranda's head snapped up. Even Margaret looked surprised. What I am proposing, I continued, is a vote of confidence. The board will decide whether Gerald Whitford retains their confidence as CEO of Whitford Properties. If the majority votes no confidence, he resigns. If the majority votes confidence, I will not interfere with operational leadership during my tenure as majority shareholder. This is absurd, Miranda stood. You're turning this into a spectacle, a revenge fantasy. No, I met her eyes. This is corporate governance. The same process that exists in every well-run company. The same process Grandma Eleanor established in our bylaws 40 years ago. I paused. If Dad has the board's confidence, he has nothing to worry about. Robert Hartley studied me for a long moment. Something like respect flickered in his expression. Is there a second for this motion? Seconded. Margaret Coleman didn't hesitate. Then we'll vote. All those expressing confidence in Gerald Whitford as CEO, raise your hands. 4 hands went up. Gerald's allies. People who owed their board seats to his recommendations. All those expressing no confidence. 7 hands rose. Robert Hartley counted twice. Then he set down his pen. The motion carries, 7-4, with 1 abstention. He turned to Gerald. Mr. Whitford, the board has voted no confidence. Per section 14.3 of our bylaws, you have 30 days to tender your resignation. Gerald said nothing. He stood, looked at me, really looked at me. For what might have been the first time in my life, I expected rage, hatred, threats. What I saw was worse. Recognition, the understanding that he'd underestimated me so completely that he'd lost everything. He walked out without a word. I know what some of you are thinking right now. Why didn't she just fire him? Why give him the chance to keep his job? Because revenge isn't justice. Because destroying someone doesn't undo what they did to you. And because my grandmother didn't raise me to be cruel, she raised me to be fair. If that resonates with you, hit like, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, because the story isn't over, not even close. Now, back to what happened after that boardroom cleared. Gerald caught me in the private corridor outside the boardroom. Priscilla was with him. Someone must have called her during the recess. Her face was tear-streaked, mascara bleeding down her cheeks. You. Gerald's voice was barely controlled. You ungrateful, scheming. Gerald. Priscilla put a hand on his arm. Not here. Not here? She just destroyed our family in front of 12 people. I stood my ground. I didn't destroy anything. I told the truth. The truth? Gerald laughed bitterly. Your grandmother was manipulated. That lawyer Ellis, he must have... Grandma Eleanor wrote that will 5 months after you tried to strip her of power, because she saw exactly who you are. My voice didn't waver. You didn't lose because I betrayed you. You lost because you betrayed her. Priscilla stepped forward. Dulcie, sweetheart, you have to understand. We were trying to protect you. You've always struggled. We didn't want to put pressure. You didn't protect me. You erased me. 28 years of silence crystallized into words. Every Christmas dinner, every family photo, every conversation where you talked about Miranda's achievements and pretended I didn't exist. That wasn't protection. That was abandonment. That's not fair. You're right. It wasn't fair. I met my mother's eyes. I spent my whole life trying to prove I was worthy of this family. I'm done proving. The documents speak for themselves. Gerald grabbed my arm. This isn't over. We'll contest that will. I pulled free. You'll lose. And you know it, because Grandma Eleanor planned for every contingency, including this one. I walked toward the elevator. Behind me, I heard my mother's voice. Dulcie, wait. I didn't wait. For the first time in my life, I didn't need their permission to leave. The elevator doors closed on my parents' faces. I leaned against the brushed steel wall, finally allowing myself to breathe. The adrenaline that had carried me through the past 2 hours began to ebb, leaving something unexpected in its wake. Not triumph, not satisfaction, grief. I'd just severed 28 years of hoping things would change, of believing that if I was patient enough, quiet enough, good enough, my parents would eventually see me, love me the way they loved Miranda. That hope was dead now. I'd killed it myself. The elevator descended 42 floors. By the time it reached the lobby, I'd wiped my eyes and straightened my borrowed blazer. Jonathan Ellis was waiting by the security desk. That was... He searched for the word. Remarkable. It was necessary. Your grandmother would agree. He fell into step beside me as I walked toward the exit. What happens now? Now I go home, sleep, try to figure out what my life looks like without the family I thought I had. And the company? I don't want to be CEO. I never did. We stopped at the revolving doors. I just want the company my grandmother built to be run by people who actually care about it. Not people who see it as their personal inheritance. Ellis nodded slowly. The board will want to meet with you, discuss transition plans, your role going forward. I know, but not today. I pushed through the door, felt the Manhattan sunlight hit my face. Today, I just need to be Dulcie Whitford, not a shareholder, not a victim, not a symbol. And tomorrow? I looked back at Whitford Tower, 42 stories of glass and steel bearing my family's name. Tomorrow, I start building something new. May 19th, 2024. Gerald Whitford signed his resignation letter at 4:00 p.m. I wasn't there. I learned about it through an email from Robert Hartley. Miss Whitford, your father has tendered his resignation effective June 15th, 2024. The board has appointed me as interim CEO while we conduct a search for permanent leadership. Additionally, the board has voted to offer you a formal position, strategic advisor to the board. This role would allow you to participate in major decisions while you determine your long-term relationship with the company. Please let me know your thoughts. Regards, Robert Hartley. I read the email 3 times, habit, and then forwarded it to Jonathan Ellis for review. His response came within an hour. Fair offer, no hidden strings. Congratulations, Dulcie. That evening, an all-staff email went out. To the Whitford Properties team. Effective June 15th, Gerald Whitford will step down as CEO. Robert Hartley will serve as interim CEO. Additionally, the board welcomes Dulcie Whitford as a strategic advisor in her capacity as majority shareholder. We thank Gerald for his years of service and wish him well in future endeavors. My phone buzzed with messages. Colleagues I'd worked beside for 2 years, people who'd never learned my name, suddenly wanted to have coffee, to reconnect, to catch up. I ignored most of them. But one message stood out. From Patricia Morales, an executive assistant who'd started at the company in 1987, who'd worked directly with my grandmother. Dulcie, Eleanor used to talk about you constantly. She said you saw things others missed. I never understood what she meant until today. Welcome to the boardroom. She'd be so proud. I saved that message. Some validation doesn't come from family. Sometimes that's better. 1 week later, the story went public. New York Business Journal. Whitford Properties. Shakeup. Founder's granddaughter takes control after secret will surfaces. The article didn't name me directly. Corporate privacy laws prevented that, but anyone in Manhattan real estate circles knew exactly who it was about. In a dramatic turn of events, the heir apparent to the Whitford Properties empire has been displaced by a previously unknown family member. Sources close to the board describe the transition as long overdue and cite concerns about the former CEO's management style. Gerald and Priscilla canceled their appearance at the Metropolitan Museum Gala. Health reasons, according to their publicist. 3 investment partners requested meetings with me personally, not with my father, not with the board, but with me. 2 of them, after an hour-long conversation each, confirmed they'd continue their relationship with Whitford Properties. We've had concerns about Gerald's leadership for years, one admitted. Your grandmother built something special. It's good to see her vision protected. The social fallout rippled outward. Friends of my parents suddenly remembered previous engagements. Invitations to charity events dried up. The Whitford name, which had once opened every door on the Upper East Side, now carried an asterisk. I didn't celebrate their humiliation, but I didn't mourn it either. Margaret Coleman called me on Saturday morning. How are you holding up? I don't know yet. Ask me in 6 months. Fair enough. A pause. Eleanor would have handled it exactly the same way, you know. The vote of confidence instead of termination, giving him a chance he didn't deserve. She laughed softly. She always said mercy was the ultimate power move. I thought about that for a long time after we hung up. Mercy wasn't weakness. Mercy was choice. And for the first time, the choice had been mine. June 8th, 2024. 3 weeks after the board meeting. My phone rang at 2:00 p.m. Dulcie? My mother's voice sounded smaller than I'd ever heard it. Can we talk? Just us? I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop in Midtown. Neutral territory. No chance of Gerald appearing with lawyers. Priscilla was already there when I arrived. She looked older somehow. The careful makeup couldn't hide the exhaustion beneath. Thank you for coming. She wrapped her hands around a cup she hadn't touched. I know I don't deserve it. What do you want, Mom? To apologize. The word came out cracked. For everything. For the way we treated you, for the things we said, for the things we didn't say. Are you apologizing because you're sorry, or because everything changed? She flinched. The question hung between us like smoke. Both, she finally admitted. I'm ashamed to say it, but both. Her eyes welled. I was so focused on Miranda's success, on maintaining appearances. I told myself we were protecting you from expectations you couldn't meet. But that was a lie I told myself, so I wouldn't have to feel guilty. You let Dad call me worthless in front of family, in front of business partners. You never defended me, not once. I know. A tear slipped down her cheek. I know, and I can never undo it. But Dulcie, I don't want to lose you entirely. I don't know if that's even possible anymore, but I had to try. I looked at this woman who'd been my mother for 28 years, who'd braided my hair as a child and forgotten my birthday as an adult. I can't pretend the last 20 years didn't happen, I said slowly, but I'm willing to try building something new, something honest. She nodded, unable to speak. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. August 2024, 2 months later. Miranda called while I was walking through Central Park. I almost didn't answer. Dulcie, I know I have no right to ask, but can we meet? There's something I need to say. We sat on a bench near Bethesda Fountain. The August heat pressed down like a weight. Miranda looked different. The armor of perfection she'd worn her whole life had cracked. Dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back carelessly. I've been in therapy, she said without preamble. Since May, 3 times a week. That's good. It's brutal. She laughed humorlessly. Turns out, being the golden child isn't actually a gift. It's a different kind of cage. I waited. Dad expected me to be perfect. Every grade, every achievement, every award was never enough. It was just the baseline for what came next. She stared at the fountain. And the way they treated you, I told myself it was just how things were, that you were different, that I was protecting you by not challenging them. You weren't protecting me. No, I was protecting myself. Because if I defended you, I became a target too. She finally looked at me. That's not an excuse, it's just the truth. What do you want from me, Miranda? Nothing. I don't deserve anything. Her voice cracked. I just wanted you to know. I see you now. Really see you. And I'm sorry I didn't look sooner. We sat in silence. 2 sisters who'd grown up in the same house as strangers. I can't go back to how things were, I said finally. But I'm not interested in staying enemies either. Maybe we start over. From scratch. Miranda's eyes filled with tears. I'd like that. It wasn't the sister relationship I'd wanted as a child, but maybe it could become something real. November 2024, 6 months after the board meeting. I moved into my own apartment in Brooklyn Heights. 1 bedroom, pre-war building. A view of the bridge my grandmother had walked across to her first office in 1965. The rent was more than I'd ever paid, but I could afford it now. My new salary as Director of Sustainable Development at Whitford Properties, $185,000 a year, plus dividends from my shares. The title was my idea. A new division focused on green building practices, sustainable real estate, environmental impact assessments. The kind of innovation my grandmother would have championed if she'd lived to see it. Gerald called once a month now. Short conversations, polite. He asked about the weather, about my new apartment, about work. We both pretended the past hadn't happened. It was easier that way. Priscilla and I had lunch every other week. Slowly, awkwardly, she was learning to see me as a person instead of a problem. It wasn't the mother-daughter relationship I'd dreamed of, but it was honest, which was more than we'd ever had. Miranda and I got coffee on weekends sometimes. We were learning each other, really learning, for the first time. She told me about the pressure she'd carried. I told her about the loneliness. Neither of us pretended the past was okay. but we were writing a new story. On the wall of my apartment, I'd hung my grandmother's portrait, the same one that had watched over the boardroom for 40 years. Sometimes, when the evening light hit it just right, I could almost see her smiling. "You did it, Grandma," I thought. "You gave me the tools. I just had to be brave enough to use them. 6 months ago, I was invisible. Now I was finally, fully, myself." Looking back, I understand something now that I couldn't have understood at 27. My grandmother didn't leave me 51% of her company because I was better than Miranda. She left it to me because she knew I wouldn't let power corrupt me the way it had corrupted my father. Dyslexia isn't my flaw. It's part of who I am, like my visual memory, my patience, my ability to see patterns others miss. The things that made me slow in my parents' eyes were the same things that made me see the truth when everyone else looked away. Gerald judged worth by credentials, by degrees, by performance. Eleanor judged worth by character, by kindness, by the way people treated those who couldn't fight back. And now, finally, I get to judge my own worth. Not by what my parents say, not by what my sister achieved, not by what any stranger on the internet thinks, by my own standard, my own measure, my own truth. If you're watching this and you recognize yourself in my story, if you've ever been the overlooked one, the dismissed one, the one they said would never amount to anything, I want you to know something. You don't need a secret inheritance to prove your value, but you do need to give yourself permission to stop seeking approval from people who will never give it. Boundaries aren't walls, they're doors. They let you decide who gets access to your life and on what terms. My family hurt me for 28 years, but I didn't need to hurt them back to find peace. I just needed to stop waiting for them to see me and start seeing myself. That's the real inheritance my grandmother left me, and nobody can ever take it away. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you that your worth isn't determined by the people who failed to see it, I want to hear from you. Subscribe, hit the bell, leave a comment telling me your story. And if you want more stories like this, stories about ordinary people who found the courage to stand up for themselves, check the link in the description. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Until next time.